Hey, welcome along to tonight's Mark Steyn Show. Well, Sajid Javid is still unavailable and unresponsive to our questions. Likewise, AstraZeneca. Leave your message at the tone and we'll get back to you circa 2075. Likewise, Lord Grade of Ofcom. He can't come on the show because his cat has a urinary tract infection. So as usual, we have no one to talk to except your fellow citizens. We are privileged to welcome back Vicky Spitt and Charlotte Wright, two young women widowed by the COVID vaccine. Ava Valadingerbroek is here with more on that World Health Organization pandemic treaty we've been signed up for. If you've enjoyed the last 2 years, well, it's forever. And pop colossus Mike Batt will pour through the entrails of an unusual Eurovision night. There he is, being inducted into the Royal Victorian Order. Lucky fellow. All that, plus the most vital part of the show, all the more important when we live in the constant swirl of a blizzard of lies. Your comments and questions, send them along by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, Twitter @gbnews. But fast as ever, the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Mark, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to scrap, but rather reform the Northern Ireland Protocol. He's been in Belfast today holding emergency talks with the country's leaders. The Democratic Unionist Party is refusing to form a devolved government until the UK takes action over the border in the Irish Sea. Sinn Féin's President, Mary Lou McDonald, has accused the government of placating the DUP. But Boris Johnson says he's urged them to cooperate.
You need leadership and you need government. So you bet. I said to the DUP in particular, we want to see you back in the executive. We want to see you nominating. We want to see a speaker in the assembly. Of course. Now the issue they have is that they object to the operation of the protocol. We don't want to scrap it, but we think it can be fixed. And actually, 5 of the 5 parties I talked to today also think it needs reform.
The Swedish government has announced it will apply for NATO membership. Finland made a similar announcement yesterday as both countries re-evaluate their security status as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia's president has warned that expanding military infrastructure in the Nordic countries would provoke a response. Sweden's Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says the best option for her country's security is to join NATO together with Finland.
If Sweden joins NATO, the threshold for military conflicts would increase and have a deterrent effect in Northern Europe. This would especially be the case if Sweden and Finland joined NATO together. As a NATO member, Sweden would not only strengthen its own security, but also contribute to enhance security in the Baltic Sea region and for NATO as a whole.
A 22-year-old man has been found guilty of the murder of police community support officer Julia James. Callum Wheeler beat to death the mother of 2 as she walked her dog in fields near the back of her home in Snowdown in Kent. A jury at Canterbury Crown Court took less than 70 minutes to find him guilty of Mrs. James's murder. Stop and search restrictions have now been permanently lifted in areas where officers expect serious violence. The measures become controversial over concerns it disproportionately affects black and ethnic minority communities. But Policing Minister Kit Malthouse doesn't think this is the case.
We do have to make sure that stop and search is done with respect. Body-worn video makes a big difference now. It has to be targeted in those areas where we know violence is likely to occur. Because I speak to parents all the time who want to know their kids are going to get home from school safe and sound. And tonight, stop and search is what we have to do.
Well, some news just in for you. Around a dozen buses have been spotted carrying wounded Ukrainian servicemen leaving the besieged steelworks in Mariupol. That news just in. We will, of course, have more on that story as we get it. Now, the Prime Minister has commended the bravery and courage of Blackpool football player Jake Daniels, who has come out publicly as gay today. The 17-year-old forward says he made the decision after feeling that he'd proved himself as a professional player. The Professional Footballers Association says it's extremely proud of him. He's the first male professional footballer to come out in the UK since Justin Fashanu in 1990. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
Thanks to 2 years of insane policies by almost all Western governments, we're poorer, we're sicker, our children are damaged. Serious times, and serious times demand serious politicians.
Hi, I'm Victor Klein, I'm leader of TNL, and we have a policy for net zero emissions by 2030 to stop the rising waters. If we wait another 20 or 30 years like Liberal, Labor and the Independent want, we'll be in deep water. So if you live in the federal seat of North Sydney and you care about real action on climate change, vote 1, Victor Klein. Before it's...
There's never a great white shark around when you need one. And they'd appreciate a guy in a suit and tie after years of making do with Bondi surfer dudes in Speedos. But the message is clear. Unless you're over 6'7", you're going to drown, probably before Election Day. Well, he's just some bloke in North Sydney. What does the deputy leader of the free world have to say about all this?
It's especially true when it comes to the climate crisis, which is why we will work together and continue to work together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, and to work together as we continue to work operating from the new norms, rules, and agreements that we will convene to work together on to galvanize global action. With that, I thank you all. This is a matter of urgent priority for all of us, and I know we will work on this together.
So if I understand, we will not only work together, but we will continue to work together, lest you thought we were going to cease working together in order to go out and get a decaf latte and a cranberry muffin. No, no, no. Don't ever doubt our commitment to working together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, to address these challenges, tackle these issues, challenge these issues, issue these addresses, in which we tackle the issue of challenging all of us to work together, to continue to work together, to work to continue together, to tackle together the work of working together. You know, the more Kamala Harris talks about working together, the more you get the vague feeling she's not doing any work at all. Politics is very boring to healthy, well-adjusted people, but sometimes politicians screw up so much of the planet that it starts to impact very basic aspects of life. For example, the United States has a baby formula shortage. By the time they're there, 43% of it, shortage of 43% of baby formula. By the time they're 6 months old, 3 out of 4 American babies are on formula milk. We keep hearing about these millions and millions of pregnant men with their six-pack abs full of tasty, nutritious milk. Yet all these lactating men refuse to step forward. Gee, it's almost like all our modish obsessions have no real-world meaning. Another headline, India, second largest wheat producer, bans exports amid food supply concerns. Global wheat prices have increased by more than 40% since the beginning of the year. You don't say. I wonder why that would be. India is the second largest wheat producer. China is the first, so that's all sprinkled with the Omicron. The third largest wheat producer is, let me see, Russia. Gee, I hope now that India's out of the export business, that nice fella in the Kremlin will see about increasing wheat exports to Europe. In the modern world, we mostly use Marie Antoinette's apocryphal line, let them eat cake, in a metaphorical sense. It's about to get very literal. Another headline, California is in a water crisis, yet usage is way up. Yeah, the state's population has doubled since 1970, but it hasn't built a dam since the 1960s. Gee, it's almost like all this virtue signalling can have real-world consequences. Not to worry, no bread, no water. All this shows is that we need to work together to tackle the challenges of working together. Our leaders are making major investments in organic gruel washed down with a nice E. coli colada. And I haven't even mentioned the most obvious indictment of our wretched political class, a headline so obvious we never read it in any paper. While all the smart people are worrying about a 6-foot rise in sea levels at Bondi Beach, the real story is excess mortality. All deaths, not COVID. This is Australia. Take a look at this. This is a country that's been cut off from the world for 2 years, and yet at the end of January, see that big spike up in the top right corner, the line about to disappear out of the top of the piece of paper and into the stratosphere? That's 26% excess mortality. Australia, after 2 years of being locked down from the world, 26% excess mortality. I'll come back to that. Fortunately, at a time when our politicians are failing us, ordinary individuals are stepping forward to do their part. This is, of course, Bill Gates, the founder of Mubosoft, America's wet nurse, as I like to think of him. He can solve the baby milk shortage single-handedly or even single-breastedly. I haven't glimpsed knockers that impressive since a lesbian prison movie on a bootleg video at a stag night in 1978. Terrific. This is the world our rulers have made, a world in which supply chains are so disrupted that the world's fourth richest man can't find a polo shirt that doesn't hug his curves like Liz Hurley in that safety pin dress. What was that? Oh, sorry, my mistake. It turns out that Bill Gates isn't going to solve America's baby milk crisis. Instead, he's going to make the last 2 years permanent by backing the new World Health Organization pandemic treaty. Here he is with the WHO's Dr. Tedros. Let's take a look at this power couple. Gee, it's almost like his giant man boobs are just there to distract us from the fact that he's buying up our democracy. I think I prefer Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. He's Ming the Merciless. Whereas Bill Gates is Moob the Merciless. You're poorer, you're sicker, you can't see a doctor, everything's more expensive and in shorter supply because the West's political class is determined to double down on the last 2 years. Let me know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. A couple of updates to stories we've been covering in recent days. The pseudo-butch boys of whatever that station's called, Talk Radio, is that it? Their pseudo-butch boys poo-pooed our focus on those damaged by the vaccines. Baroness Hallett, who's heading the official inquiry into these last 2 god-awful years, feels differently. She's asked the PM if she can expand her remit to cover those killed or catastrophically injured by the COVID jabs. We shall see. And Steve Baker MP has tabled a question to the Health Secretary asking to know the negotiating position of Her Majesty's government with respect to this new WHO pandemic treaty, which, as I said, makes the last 2 years permanent and then some. Ava Vlaardingerbroek joins me now. Ava's been writing about this. She was with us last week. You've actually looked at the specifics of this and the power it gives Dr. Tedros, who isn't a doctor at all, he's just some Ethiopian political fixer. The power it gives him is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's the power of a worldwide dictatorship, if you want to put it that way. Like last time I was on your show, we talked about this new pandemic treaty that the World Health Organization is now drafting. That will be presented to us in August. But while I was looking into this new treaty, I found something else that they're also working on. And this is where it might get a little technical because there are a lot of names involved here, but hear me out. You have the World Health Organization that has a World Health Assembly meeting next week on the 22nd of May. And what they'll do there is they're going to vote on amendments made by the Biden administration to the international health regulations. I didn't even know we had those, but apparently we do. So there are international health regulations that stem from 2005 that are now being amended. And when you look at those amendments, what you see there is basically two trends. You see that a lot of power that was usually in the hand of the state parties, which, by the way, is the entire world, and 194 countries to be specific, is taken away. And a lot of power is added when it comes to decisions that can be made by Dr. Tedros, the China show. And so I decided to look a little bit at what these amendments say specifically. And well, if you look at, for example, Amendment 12, and all of these documents are to be found on the internet. If you go to my Twitter page, you can find them really easily. Is that now the World Health Organization is going to be able to determine, they are going to decide when our respective nations face a public health emergency. So they get to decide when we are dealing with a new pandemic. And they also later will get to decide through this new treaty that we talked about last week, how we need to respond to them. So looking at Article 12, what is a health emergency? Well, they basically say Dr. Tedros decides. Looking at the text, it literally says, I now quote him here, an event that has not been determined to meet the criteria for a public health emergency will still fall under the portfolio of this man, Dr. Tedros. So Dr. Tedros himself is going to decide whether we have a pandemic or not, whether we have a health risk. And he can just decide whenever he feels like it, if that's the case.
So let me just see if I understand this, Ava. You're Dutch, and the Netherlands is a perfectly respectable constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy, but your elected representatives can basically be overruled. Dr. Tedros will tell the Kingdom of the Netherlands if it has a public health emergency, regardless of how your politicians feel about it.
Exactly. We have absolutely nothing to say about it when this treaty is passed, when these regulations are amended, which they most likely will be next week. Because what will happen is all of these representatives from our respective state parties will go there and will definitely sign this off. They will definitely say, sure, we're going to agree with these amendments. So Dr. Tedros will have these powers. Looking at, for example, our Minister of Health, he was a big fan of all these draconian COVID measures, so I highly doubted that he will say no to give the powers to the World Health Organization. I think this is the case for most countries. So be sure that these amendments will be there. And once these powers are handed over to the World Health Organization, we have nothing to say about it because we didn't elect Dr. Tedros, so we can't hold him accountable for any of the decisions he makes. What that means is that there is no longer democracy when it is about our health agenda. There is no longer democracy when there is a crisis or when there is a pandemic. That's all in the hands of the World Health Organization when this goes through.
Why would they be doing that? Because these are 196 very different governments. And basically, the WHO failed us all, if you believe their numbers. They failed us all these last 2 years. They covered for China at a time when China was lying to the world, just like they did with SARS 20 years back. They did the exact same thing, the WHO. They covered for China's lies. Why do 196 sovereign nations want to put their fate in the hands of the WHO?
Well, you already mentioned one stakeholder that is incredibly powerful here, and that's China. So we have in the World Health Organization, there are a couple of stakeholders that are very, very powerful. First of all, China through the general director, Dr. Tedros, but also a man who you just talked about his man boobs and his probably habit of eating too much soy, Bill Gates, has massive stakes in the World Health Organization. He's the second largest financial donor. And then the European Union, well, I mean, every single country in the Western world has shown that they are not as democratic as we thought over these past 2 years. They like the power that they got in this basically totalitarian COVID regime that has rolled out over the past 2 years. So why would they give that up? This is a plan I think that they've had for a long time, and this is the first chance that they get to go forward with a world government, because that is really what this is. And apparently that is in the interest of, well, these three groups. So I think that's why.
Yeah, you're right about that. It's basically one big COVID stan. You may be living in Northern Europe, you may be living in the South Pacific, but your public health is all directed by these fellas living high off the hog on Bill Gates' money. Thank you very much, as always, Ava. We're coming right back with your comments on this. Plus, we welcome back to the show two widows of the vaccine, Vicky Spitt and Charlotte Wright, and pop maestro Mike Batt will be here a little later on what exactly happened at Eurovision. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back. Hey, let's get to your comments. Chunky Monkey, possibly not his real name. Chunky Monkey, although these days you never know, do you? Chunky Monkey says if Boris signs up for this, he will lose the next election. That may well be, Chunky Monkey, but the problem with our diseased democracy is that he's only going to lose it to some party that's even more hot for all this rubbish than he is. That's been the failure of politics this last 2 years. On the one hand, you've got lockdown lunatics, and on the other hand, even more lockdown lunatics. It's like that election they had in Egypt, whatever it was, 10 years ago, where the two principal parties were the Muslim Brotherhood and the even more Muslim Brotherhood. There we've got the lockdown lunatics and the even more lockdown lunatics. Great. Kirsty Arden says newspapers and media magnates are already in control of the UK, so the WHO don't stand a chance. I wish that were true, actually. If we were just dealing with competitive press barons, that'd be one thing, but instead we got a cartel of woke billionaires on social media. We've got these fellas like Bill Gates. Nobody really knows what his... Did you just hear what Ava said, by the way? There's 200 sovereign states, give or take, 197 and change. But the second biggest donor to the World Health Organization after the is it China? After China now? Second biggest donor is Bill Gates. Ricky says, this is just another example of how faceless globalist neoliberals really run nations. These faceless globalists may be faceless, but as you saw with Bill Gates, they're not moobless. The bit of the show I enjoyed most so far was hearing Ava utter the phrase Bill Gates's man boobs. One more. Emden says Donald Trump saw the Chinese have the WHO in their pocket and told them where to go. We should do the same. Yeah, you know what they did to Donald Trump, though? All the globalists, they took out that guy. That's the issue here. Yeah, he suspended all payments of the United States to the WHO and said he thought the WHO were big El Stinko Floppo. And what happened? The globalists took him out. Let's take another look at that graph I showed you earlier. Excess mortality in Australia. That means more deaths than you'd expect, and I chose Australia because it's been more or less quarantined from the world for 2 years, and it's 84% fully vaccinated. And as you can see, it's excess mortality, all deaths. This is all deaths, not just COVID, but this is strokes, heart attacks, whatever. Went spiking up to 26% higher than normal a few weeks back, a country that's been cut off from the world for 2 years. Things are so bad that even a tireless propagandist such as the state broadcaster, the ABC, has begun to notice something is amiss. Quote, COVID-19 infections in Australia hit worldwide highs. That's to say they're the highest in the world for a nation where 84% are fully vaccinated. Something is badly wrong with these COVID vaccines, and even on British TV, we have to be able to talk about that. The most benign possibility is that they're just not very good. We talked about that a few weeks ago, and now I'm being investigated by Ofcom, which is a big pain in the butt. And really is no business of government regulators, because the real story is that constraining acceptable debate within too narrow bounds is one of the reasons why we're where we are now, where countries that have huge numbers of double and triple vaccinated are nevertheless accounting for extraordinary percentages of those in hospital and those who are dead from COVID and of many other things. A few days ago, we had Vicky Spitt and Charlotte Wright on this show. They're young widows in their 30s who lost their husbands to the COVID vaccine and have been abandoned by the government. It's a huge honour to have them back with us. Let me ask you first, Vicky, what do you make? And by the way, introduce your dog to us before we go any further, because we don't often get a canine as cute as that on the show. Who's the dog?
This is Scully. Z got her for me for my 31st birthday, and you know, she's my emotional support dog, really.
Well, you could use an emotional support dog. You know, I looked at some of the comments you got after you appeared on the show. And one guy, one fathead on Twitter, you know, one of these keyboard warriors, basically accused you of just seeking fame.
Yes.
And you replied to him that when Xeon was here and you guys would go touring all over the UK and Europe, I think you were playing bass in the band. Yeah. So you knew what it's like to have that thrill when a live audience roars the ceiling off because they're just so delighted to see you. And that's a much bigger thrill than just going on Twitter and talking about COVID vaccines. But was that guy typical of the kind of pushback you got from people?
I have seen a few comments saying that I'm clearly doing it to sell albums, or I'm going to reform the band, and how? And you know, we haven't played since 2013 anyway, so why would I all of a sudden want to reform the band after my partner of 21 years and the singer of the band has died?
That's a very reasonable point that you shouldn't even have to make. There is a lot of heartlessness out there, Charlotte, but at the same time, there are people who are in the same situation as you and Vicky, or they are themselves injured by these vaccines and want to get to the bottom of it.
Yes, unfortunately, there are quite a few out there, and we know a fair few.
We do.
And lots of people do still reach out to us, and you know, we help where we can. I think that's the main reason why we've started the campaign.
Yeah, VIP UK.
We've got somewhere to direct them finally.
Well, we now have a situation where the Baroness, who's heading this inquiry, has asked the Prime Minister if she can extend the terms of her inquiry to cover those either damaged or killed by the vaccines. Do you think that's a good development, or just another way to push it all under the rug until everyone's forgotten about it?
No, I think we've thought that was positive.
We did, all of us, email and request for the vaccines to be included in the terms of reference. I mean, our biggest concern now is that Boris might reject them from the inquiry. So thank you, Mark and GBNews, for bringing this up, because I think the more people who know that that is potentially in the inquiry, the less chance there is of it being thrown out.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, and I don't want to make this a thing where we just talk about the media, but what is interesting to me is that clearly there's these vaccines, just to put it at its mildest, these vaccines were oversold. They were supposed to be 95% effective. They're not. So in other words, they've been telling people you have to take these things when they really didn't. And the sad fact of the matter is that they should have instead been more honest about the pros and cons. Don't you feel? I mean, it's particularly sad for you, Charlotte, because your husband worked in the medical profession, where there was perhaps the most active suppression of alternative voices when it came to these vaccines.
Yes, and of course, due to his role, he was one of the first people to be offered it, and there was very little information. I mean, you say pros and cons, but at the time there was no con mentioned.
So that in fact he lacked the information to give informed consent, as it were. I mean, that's what's so difficult about this situation. Yeah. What do you make of there are stories popping up all over the map now? There's I think it was the morning news show in San Diego was reporting on 40% increase in mortality, and particularly in issues such as myocarditis and blood clots. There are these unexplained rises in mortality in Australia, in America, Iceland. Do you think we should actually be having an honest debate on what these means?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there hasn't been any, as you know, you well know, everything's been covered up and just don't talk about any vaccine damage. And that's how I first got in contact with you, with Twitter removing my story that was in The Independent, the 1 year on. I mean, 1 year on, and we're finally getting some light thrown on us.
I think that's what makes it so unfair, is that there has been no debate, and normally there would be a fair debate with anything else.
And with regards to Charlotte's informed consent, and Charlotte's husband had no clue. No one did. Very few people were actually given the information about the vaccines before they got the vaccines, even before they had it.
You had the injection and then you got the information after that wasn't up to date because they didn't have it available.
And they didn't update the information. Well, they knew about the blood clots from March.
Well, yeah, which was a good few months after Stephen had it. But
and they didn't even put anything in the information until June.
No. And had I been able to speak, then from January, there would have been a bit more information for everyone.
We still haven't had a change from what you might call the establishment, though. I just saw this from the Oxford University Centre for Business, where they're making a proposal that the unvaccinated should actually be subject to higher taxes. In other words, that if you're triple vaccinated, you get a lower rate of tax than if you're unvaccinated. What has that got to do with medicine or public health?
That's disgusting.
Nothing. But as always, it's about money. And,
exactly.
I'm appalled.
That I hadn't heard that. That's horrendous.
Yeah. I'd like someone to ask me to pay higher taxes.
Oh God, yes.
After what's happened, I think that would...
I mean, it's not even a vaccine, is it, though?
No.
Yeah, tetanus is a vaccine. You get it once every 10 years, more than 10 years.
Yeah.
It's not something you get every few weeks.
But doesn't that give you an air of punishment as well? Like, so I should be punished for not taking the thing that my husband died from.
And what about people who can't have
that's basically... That's what they're telling you, Charlotte. Let me... look at it from another way too. That what's happened to you? They tell us this is a war. That's what they said for 2 years. This is like a war, so governments have to be given extraordinary powers, and you have to do your part as you would in a war. Well, in that case, your husbands, if you believe that, your husbands are casualties of war, and yet they're being treated far worse than whoever you want to name, the Gurkhas in Nepal or whoever it is. They're actually the Gurkhas in Nepal. People are allowed to advocate for them. People are allowed to argue their cause. People are allowed to say, no, you've given so much money, that's not enough, you've got to do better. And with your husbands, it's the complete opposite. Every time you mention them, you get a health warning label slapped on you by Twitter or Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, saying you shouldn't even be talking about this.
No, and that they're not casualties of war, and they are.
Yeah, all of them, they did what they thought was the right thing to protect others, and
they fought for their country.
Yeah, they tried to protect people, and they died doing it, and they're just being ignored. And just personally, I don't know about you, but I feel like it's insult to injury that getting the vaccine doesn't even stop you getting and spreading COVID.
No.
It's just, so they died for nothing.
No, absolutely.
Do you think that because it's very hard, people keep saying, when Christopher Chope raises this in the Commons, he quotes the yellow card reports that say over 2,000 have died, which would suggest, if this was the normal percentage, that maybe 20,000 have actually died of this in the UK. And then you have people pushing back on you and saying, no, that's not true. The real problem here is that the government is not actually issuing statistics, the relevant statistics on this issue as to how many people have been injured and how many people have been killed. Do you think the Office of National Statistics and these kind of people have been hopelessly politicised and that in fact they're sitting on the information?
Well, if they reported the vaccine deaths the same way they report the COVID deaths, as if people who died within 30 days of having a COVID injection, or people who died within 30 days of having COVID, I think, well, it'd be horrific, wouldn't it?
It just makes no sense to me that they have one side of the coin. They have the information readily available, but on our side, it's also not available. No. You know, we'll get back to you.
And there's the elderly people who were in the first vaccine rollout that weren't investigated, but they were just, they're old, it's natural causes. And I know several people who had extremely fit and healthy relatives, and we'll never know now.
How are you coping with one of the horrible things that happens? You went through one horrible event, each of you. You lost your husbands. That's a terrible thing. That's bereavement. That's the loss of your life partner. That's the loss, in large part, of all the assumptions you had about your daily routine and everything. It's all changed. It's changed forever. It's changed for your children, Charlotte, as we talked about last week. But there's a price to be paid for becoming an activist. And in some strange way, I read your tweets, I follow your tweets every day. It's a terrible, if only other people in the media would take up the cause of dead Englishmen, injured Scotsmen, Welshmen and Irishmen who've been crippled. These are our neighbours. These are our fellow citizens. And yet there's a kind of code of silence that's descended, and that means the burden falls on you. We should share the burden. It's not fair that it's you two and your group and the media could actually enable you to get your lives back if they would start pushing this story.
Well, absolutely. I think that the whole experience has just been tenfold with the amount of emotional kind of stress that we have had to burden ourselves with.
Physical toll, emotional toll.
Yeah, and all of us, not just us. Our whole group. We were brought together by all different types of tragedies, and it is a huge responsibility, and it does come with a lot of negativities. But I think that our strength comes from the fact that we know we're right.
Yeah, we do. We know we are legitimate.
We know what we're doing is the right thing to do.
We did the right thing. We are continuing to do the right thing, albeit for a smaller group of people. Initially we thought we were helping the whole country. Now I think we feel like we are campaigning not just for us, but for all of the victims and the injured people. Because some of them, they don't have, people
don't even know where to go.
No, they don't know what to do. They don't have the strength to campaign. They don't know who to talk to, or they're just too exhausted and physically disabled to be able to talk to anyone about it. And so, we want to help all of these people.
Yeah, and I don't know about you.
No,
you're as well. Yes. To be able to be there, because I would want that to advocate for them.
Yes.
So yes, we might be activists, but we are also, we want to do it because we would want that for us. We did want that for us.
Yeah, we
do want that.
Yeah.
For us.
Well, I think you're making a difference. This Baroness who heads the inquiry, and I'm generally wary of baronesses. Baroness Hallett, I think there's absolutely no doubt that she wouldn't actually have raised this with the Prime Minister were it not for you two and the others in your group, which is VIB UK. And you can now go on the internet and find that. That's Vaccine Injured and Bereaved. And those buffoons at Talk Radio who basically, and those idiots at Facebook who say, oh, well, this is misinformation. These people who claim to be fact checkers like Full Fact, they don't call you up and say, wait a minute, are you really widowed, or are you just putting it on Twitter? They don't do that. They just label you misinformation. Shame on them. American billionaires basically trying to throttle the voice of British subjects arguing for justice before a parliament that would rather ignore them. You're two very brave and strong ladies. You shouldn't have to fight this fight alone. And at GB News, at the very least, we are not going to let you fight this fight alone. Thank you very much, Vicky and
really
Charlotte.
Appreciate the help you've given us.
No, we appreciate what you are doing, and we will see you again on this show. Stump the Stein is looming, and Mike Batt coming right up. Something very weird happened at Eurovision. No, not Ukraine winning. That was baked in from the start, although it does ensure more effectively than any weapons shipments that we now have an end date for the war. There's no way Putin is going to want to be bombing Mariupol when it's hosting a grand convention of Europe's clumpiest dancers and worst-dressed gays live across the planet. But forget Ukraine's trophy. That's Putin's gift to the Transcarpathian music biz. Look who came number 2. After spending the entire 21st century frosted out on the nul point wastes of the far Euro tundra, Le Royaume-Uni is now everyone's favourite non-war devastated Euro darling. One man who saw the Saturday stunner coming is Mike Batt, a great indestructible maestro of British pop, from the Wombles to Katie Malua, and it's great to welcome him back to the show. You actually have a system, Mike. You have a whole kind of range of qualities you look for in each Eurovision entry, whether it's Slovenia or Azerbaijan or wherever.
Well, it wasn't too hard to get this one this time. We all thought and wished for Ukraine to win. And frankly, I think they deserved it. I mean, not just for the political reasons, but their entry, I marked them on my point system. And they came second on my point system. No, they came first. And Britain and England came, Great Britain came second on my point system. But my point system, I have to point out to you, is a ridiculous one. Based on all sorts of silliness that it used to be relevant, still really is, when everyone used to take the Eurovision Song Contest not that seriously. Look, there's a guy in a pink hat. He's not taking it that seriously either, but he sure wants to win, doesn't he? Good job he did as well.
Right. You actually have a shaggability character category in there. So you, I don't know whether we can say that. I'm already being investigated by Ofcom, so they can do me for a shaggability bonus if we're not allowed to talk about that. But I like this. You.
So we used to have parties. I think I invented the Eurovision Party. I didn't really. I used to like to think I did in the early 80s. And I'd give out people a questionnaire, and it would say melody, beat, to points out of 10, lyrics, points out of 10. How can you tell the lyrics of somebody singing in Greek, unless you're Greek or speak Greek? Lyrics, costumes, dancing. Yes, this year I put shaggability, and I know that's desperately, what's the word, misogynistic. But hey, it's girls can play it too, and yes, I didn't give the what's it called the Ukrainians, as if I forget their name. I didn't give them much in the shaggability factor, but it's all done in great fun. And to be honest with you, I haven't taken it as seriously as this. forever.
Yeah.
At the time, it just felt that we had a great song. The wonderful thing about our entry this year was Sam Ryder himself, his personality. You just look at him, imagine yourself a European judge, and he doesn't look English.
Yeah.
He hasn't got, he hasn't got that typical sort. Of course, we don't all wear bowler hats and carry umbrellas, but he looks more like a Viking. And he's got this great, big, strong voice that then goes into a well-strong falsetto when he goes high. And he's also got this other thing, which is the ability to sing with passion, but not look as if you're raging mad and sad. He looks happy while he sings passionately. And that goes for a lot. The delivery as well as the song. I think we really deserved our long-awaited second place this year.
But don't you think there's some truth to the argument that just as we knew Ukraine would win, and that's a political decision, they would have had to have a particularly terrible act and a terrible song not to win. Isn't it also the case that the UK came second because, whatever you feel about it, Boris is perceived as being the most practically useful world leader to Ukraine, and he was the first to go walkabout with Zelensky in the streets of Kiev before the Johnny-come-latelys like Justin Trudeau all jumped on the bandwagon? Don't you think that was as political? The number 2 place was as political. I mean, I see what you mean about. I'm trying my best to see what you see about the shaggability and all of that, and I can go along with that. But there is politics in this decision too, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, my point was that it's never been a song contest. I know there's lots of people out there will go, yes, it is, yes, it is. And it is a bit a song contest, and this was a great song. But it's got lots of other things. But one of the things, as you say, is politics. I mean, way back through the Terry Wogan days and Graham Norton, nobody expected, and they almost predicted that the Eastern Bloc would vote for each other, that Cyprus would vote for Greece and vice versa. And that you're right, it does seem to have gone away this year. And yes, maybe it is because of Boris going over and leading the charge a little bit. You can't really lead America into something, but certainly I think his gung-ho has helped. And also, you've got the Putin factor, which means that we've all got a common enemy. Let's call it what it is. He perceives himself to be the enemy, therefore he's started to behave like one. He wasn't an enemy before he perceived himself to be one. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest. And I do think you're right. The waters changed this year because of the politics.
Well, let me say, I don't want you to improvise a song about Vladimir Putin on the spot, Mike. I'm not going to put you through that. But let me ask you, as far as I'm aware, when we go back and I look at all the British songwriters going back to the 70s, 60s, who've been asked to do a Eurovision song, I think people like Lindsay DePaul and Bill Martin and Phil Coulter, I think, started it all with Puppet on a String. Why have you never been asked to contribute a Eurovision song?
I was once asked to be the only entrant of the year, probably about 20 years ago, and I said I'd rather not. And it was a bit disdainful of me, I guess, because I just felt that it used to be high risk. I mean, I think it ended a lot of artists' careers who even say, I mean, look, let's not name names, but there are certain artists who had a lot of success. I mean, Cliff Richard went through an uncool period. A lot of people might say he's uncool now. I think he's one of the coolest because he's lasted the longest and he's ridden the waves. But if you look at someone like Sandy Shaw, I don't think she had much of a successful career after she won with Puppet on a String. And there is a kind of feeling, there was a feeling that it was the kiss of death to be in Eurovision, but then it's a career maker if you go in with an unknown act. Someone like Buck Spears, written by the fantastic pair of Andy Hill and Pete Sinfield, they wrote hit after hit. They were almost like the British ABBA afterwards. And so you can make careers, as I'm sure Sam Ryder will be a big star. I mean, he's just got it, and I'm sure he's going to go up into space. And then you can be like the chaps who wrote Dana's Winner, all kinds of everything, and you never hear from them again. Thank you very much, Mike. It's great to see you, and I'm going to apply your system. That's really why my Christmas album never sold, the lack of shaggability of me. I get it now, Ian. It's cruel to have to admit, but that's how it happened. Let's see what we got here while we go stumping. Thank you. Mark, do you think I should be building Noah's Ark before it's too late, says Robert. That is not going to work. Noah's Ark, the animals went in 2 by 2, and now we're all non-binary, so you can't go in 2 by 2. You're going to have to go 57 genders for each animal, so the aardvark will be the only one on the ark. Let's go to Dan Wootton, who's here to massage your Monday. What you got, Dan?
You can't talk about massage, Mark, when you've just been using the phrase a lack of shaggability. I've heard it all tonight. I've heard it all.
No,
I'm going to be continuing the theme from the Steyn
Your shaggability central.
Talking about this World Health Organization Accord, and also Bill Gates, who, let's be honest, is totally on this whole thing as well. Plus, the Margaret Thatcher statue, Mark, does it need to be moved to Westminster? We'll debate that, and David Davis live in the studio too.
That's great stuff. Looking forward to that talk on the Thatcher statue. That's all coming up with Dan. Stay safe, stay free. Here's the weather.